Alright, I think we can read. Where have I finished that? It's not as comfortable as it looks like. But it's still nice. Now what, said the consul, looking around at the night and narrow streets. Their luggage laid huddled in the soggy pile. The world smelled of ashes. Martin Silenus grinned. I know a bar. It turned out that the consul also knew the bar. He had all but lived in Ciceros for most of his 11-year assignment on Hyperion. Unlike most things in Kits on Hyperion, Ciceros was not named after some piece of pre-Hegira literally trivia. Rumor had it that the bar was named after a section of an old Earth city, some said Chicago, USA. Others were sure it was Calcutta, but only Stan Leweski, owner and great-grandson of the founder, knew for sure, and Stan had never revealed its secret. The bar itself had overflowed over the century and a half of its existence from a walk-up loft in one Jacktown sagging older buildings along the Holy River to 9 levels in 4 sagging old buildings along the Holy. The only consistent elements of decor at Ciceros over the decades were the low ceilings, thick smoke and constant background bubble which offered a sense of privacy in the midst of bustle. There was no privacy this night. The consul and the others paused as they carried their gear through the marsh lane entrance. Jesus wept, muttered Martin Silenus. Ciceros looked as if it had been invaded by barbarian hordes. Every chair was filled, every table occupied, mostly by men, and the floors were littered with packs, weapons, bedrolls, antiquated com equipment, ration boxes, and all of the other detritus of an army of refugees, or perhaps a refugee army. The heavy air of Cicero, which once had been filled with the blended scent of broiling steaks, wine, wine, steam, allay, and tea-free tobacco, was now laden with the overlapping smells of underwashed bodies, urine, and hopelessness. At the moment of huge form of Stan Leweski materialized out of the gloom. The bar owner's forearms were as huge as heavy as ever, but his forehead had advanced more than a few centimeters against the receding tangle of black hair, and there were more creases than the consul remembered around the dark eyes. Those eyes were wide now as Lewinsky stared at the consul. "Ghost," he said. "No. You are not dead?" "No. By damn," declared Lewinsky, and, grasping the consul by the upper arms, picked him up as easily as a man would lift a 5-year-old. "By damn, you are not dead. What are you doing here?" "Checking your liquor license," said the consul. "Put me down." Leweski carefully set the consul down, tapped his shoulders and grinned. He looked at Martin Silenus and the grin changed to a frown. "You look familiar, but I have never seen you before." "I knew your great-grandfather," said Silenus. "Which reminds me, do you have any of that pre-Hegira ale left? The warm British stuff that tastes like recycled mouse peas. I could never get enough of that." "Nothing left," said Lewinsky. He pointed at the poet. "By damn grandfather's jerky's trunk. That old holo of the satyr in the original Jacktown. Can it be?" He stared at Silenus and then at the consul, touching them both gingerly with a massive forefingers. "2 ghosts." "6 tired people," said the consul. The baby began crying again. 7. "Do you have space for us?" Leweski turned in a half-circle, hands spread, palms up. "It is all like this. No space left. No food, no wine. He squinted at Martin Silenus. No ale, no ale, ale, no ale. The group was standing in. No. Leweski Turhav. No, ale. Now we have become a big hotel with no beds. The SDF bastards stayed here without paying and drink their own upcountry rotgut and wait for the world to end. That will happen soon enough, I think. The group was standing in what had once been an entrance mezzanine. Their heaped luggage joined a riot of gear already littering at the floor. Small clusters of men shouldered their way through the throng and cast appraising glances at the newcomers, especially at Brawne Lamia. She turned their stars with a flat, cold glare. Stan Leweski looked at the Consul, and the moment, I have a balcony table. 5 of those SDF death commanders have been parked there for a week, telling everyone and each other how they are going to wipe out the Austral legions with their bare hands. You want the table? I will throw the suckers out. Yes, said the Consul. Leweski had turned to leave when Lumia stopped him with a hand on his arm. Would you like a little help? She asked. Stan Leweski struggled, grinned. I do not need it, but I might like it. Come. They disappeared into the crowd. The third-floor balcony had just enough room for the splintered table and 6 chairs. Despite the insane crowding on the main floor, stairs and landings, no one had challenged them for the space after Leweski and Lamia threw the protesting death commandos over the railing and into the river 9 meters below. Somehow Leweski had managed to send up a tankard of beer and a basket of bread and cold beef. The group ate in silence, obviously suffering more than the usual amount of post-Fuji hunger, fatigue and depression. The darkness of the balcony was relieved only by dim reflected light from deeper within St. Sirius and by the lanterns on the passing river barges. Most of the buildings along the Huli were dark, but other city lights reflected from low clouds. The Consul could make out the ruins of the Shrike Temple half a kilometer upriver. Well, said Father Hoyt, obviously recovered from the heavy dose of ultramorph and tethering on the delicate balance between pain and sedation. What do we do next? When no one asked, the Consul closed his eyes. He refused to take the lead in anything. Sitting on the balcony at Cicero's, it was all too easy to fall back into the rhymes of the former life. He would drink until the early morning's hours, watch the pre-dawn meteor showers as the clouds cleared, and then staggered to his empty apartment near the market, going into the consulate for hours later, showered, shaved, and seemingly human, except for the blood in his eyes and the insane ache in his skull, trusting that in Theo, quiet, efficient Theo, to get him through the morning, trusting in luck to get him through the day, trusting in the drinking at Cicero's to get him through the night, trusting in the unimportance of his posting to get him through life. You are all ready to leave for the pilgrimage? The Consul's eyes snapped open. A hooded figure stood in the doorway, and for a second the Consul thought it was Hetmanstein. But then he realized that this man was much shorter, his voice not accented with the stilted Templar consonants. If you are ready, we must go, said the dark figure. Who are you? Asked the brave Lamia. Come quickly, was the shadow-only reply. Fedman Kassad stood, bending to keep his head from striking the ceiling, and retained the robed figure, flipping back the man's hood with a flick of his left hand. "An android," said Leonard, staring at the man's blue skin and blue eyes. The consul was less surprised. For more than a century, it had been illegal to own androids in the hegemony, and none had been biofactured for almost that long, but they were still used for manual labor in remote parts of backwater, non-colony worlds like Hyperion. The Shrike Temple had used androids excessively, complying with the Church of the Shrike doctrine, which proclaimed that androids were free from original sin, therefore spiritually superior to humankind and incidentally, except from the Shrike's terrible of the Shrike's terrible and inevitable retribution. "You must come quickly," whispered the android, setting his hood in place. "Are you from the temple?" asked Lamia. "Quiet," snapped the android. He glanced into the hall, turned back and nodded. "We must hurry. Please follow me." All of them stood and then hesitated. The consul watched as Cassad casually unsealed the long leather jacket he was wearing. He caught the briefest glimpse of a death wand tucker in the coolest belt. Normally the consul would have been appalled by even the thought of a dead wand nearby. The slightest mistaken touch could puree every synapse on the balcony, but at this moment he was oddly reassured by the sight of it. "Our luggage," began Weintraub. It has been seen to," whispered the hooded man. "Quickly now. It has been seen to." The group followed the android down the stairs and into the night, their movement as tired and passive as a sigh. The consul slept late. Half an hour after sunrise, the rectangle of light found its way between the porthole shutters and fell across his pillow. The consul rolled away and did not awake. An hour after that, there came a loud clatter, and the tired mantas which had pulled the barge all night were released and fresh ones harnessed. The consul slept on. In the next hour, the footsteps and cries of the crew on the deck outside his stateroom grew louder and more persistent. But it was the warming klaxon below the locks of Carla which finally brought him up out of his sleep. Moving slowly in the dark light, langular of fugue hangover, Consul bathed. He take a shower, bathed, as best he could with only basin and pump, dressed in loose cotton trousers and old canvas shirt, and foam-soled walking shoes, and found his way to the mid-deck. Breakfast had been set out on a long sideboard near the waterhead table, which could be retracted into the deck planking. An awning shaded the eating area, and the crimson and gold canvas snapped to the breeze of their passage. It was a beautiful day, cloudless and bright, with Hyperion's sun making up in ferocity what it lacked in size. Mr. Mr. Weintraub, Lamia, Cassad and Silenus had been up for some time. Leonard Hoyt and Hetmastine joined the group a few minutes after the consul arrived. The consul helped himself to toasted fish, fruit, and orange juice at the buffet, and then moved to the railing. The water was wide here, at least a kilometer from shore to shore, and its green and lapis sheen echoed the sky. At first glance, the consul did not recognize the land on either side of the river. To the east, Persicope beam paddies stretched away into the haze of distance, where the rising sun reflected on 1,000 flooded surfaces. A few indigene huts were visible at the junction of paddy dikes, their angled walls made of bleached wirewood or golden half-oak. The west, the bottomland along the river, was overgrown with low tangles of gissen, woman grove root, and the flamboyant red fern the consul did not recognize, all growing around mud marshes and miniature lagoons which stretched along kilometers or so to bluffs where scrubs, ever blues, clung to any bare spot between granite slabs. For a second, the consul felt lost, disorientated, disorientated on a world he thought he knew well, but then he remembered the klaxon at the Carla locks and realized that they had entered a rarely used stretch of the holy north of Dothkengop's corpse. The consul had never seen this part of the river, having always travelled on the flown above the royal transparent canal which lay to the west of the bluffs. He could only surmise that some danger or disturbance along the main road to the Sea of Grass had sent them this back way along by past stretches of the Holy. He guessed that they were about 180 kilometers northwest of Keats. "It looks different in the daylight, doesn't it?" said Father Hoyt. The consul looked at the shore again, not sure what Hoyt was talking about. Then he realized the priest meant the barge. It had been strange, following the android messenger in the rain, boarding the old barge, making their way through its maze of telestated rooms and passages, picking up Het Molstein at the ruins of the temple, and then watching the lights of the kids fall astern. The consul remembered those hours before and after midnight as from a fatigue-blurred dream, and he imagined the others must have been just as exhausted and disorientated. He vaguely remembered his surprise that the barge's crew were all on droid, but mostly he recalled his relief at finally closing the door of his stateroom and crawling into bed. "I was talking to a Betic this morning," said Weintraub, referring to the android who had been their guide. This old scow had quite a story. Martin Silenus moved to the sideboard to pour himself more tomato juice, added a dash of something from the flask he carried and said, "It's obviously been around a bit. The goddamn railings were being oiled by hands, the stairs worn by feet, the ceilings darkened by lamp soot, and the beds beaten saggy by generations of humping. I'd say it's several centuries old. The carvings and rococo finishes are fucking marvelous. Did you notice that under all of other scents, the inlaid wood still smells of sandalwood? I wouldn't be surprised if these things came from old Earth." "It does," said Sol Weintraub. The baby, Rachel, slept on his arm, softly blowing bubbles of saliva in her sleep. "We're on the proud ship Benares, built in and named after the old Earth city of the same name. I don't delivery. I don't remember hearing of any old Earth city with that name," said the consul. Brawne Lamia looked up from the last of her breakfast. "Benares, also known as Varanasi or Gandhipur, Hindi Free State, part of the Second Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere after the Third Sino-Japanese War, destroyed in the Indo-Soviet Muslim Republic Limited Exchange." "Yes," said Weintraub. "The banners was built quite some time before the big mistake." The Benares, the Benares was built quite some time before the big mistake. Mid-22nd century, I would guess. A betting informs me that it was originally a levitation barge. Are the EM generations still down there? Interrupted Colonel Cassad. I believe so, said Winderand. Next to the main saloon on the lowest deck. The floor of the saloon is clear lunar crystal. Quite nice if we were cruising at 2,000 meters. Quite useless now. Benares, mused Martin Silenus. He ran his land longly across a time-darkened railing. I was robbed there once. Brave Lamia put down her coffee mug. Old man, are you trying to tell us that you're ancient enough to remember all old Earth? We're not fools, you know. My dear child, beamed Martin Silenus. I am not trying to tell you anything. I just thought it might be entertaining, as well as edifying and enlightening. If at some point we exchanged lists of all the locations at which we have either robbed or been robbed, since you have the unfair advantage of having been the daughter of the senator, I am sure that your list would be much more distinguished and much longer. Lamia opened her mouth to retort, frowned and said nothing. I wonder how this ship got to Hyperion, murmured Father Hoyt. Why bring a levitation barge to a world where EM equipment doesn't work? It would work, said Colonel Cassad. Hyperion had some magnetic field. It just would not be reliable in holding anything airborne. Father Hoyt raised an eyebrow, obviously at a loss to see the distraction. Hey, cried the poet from his place at railing. The gang's all here. So, said Brawne Lamia. Her lips all but disappeared into a thin line whenever she spoke to Silenus. So, we are here, he said. Let's get on with the storytelling. Hetmastin said, I thought it was been agreed that we would tell our respective stories after the dinner hour. Martin Silenus struggled. Breakfast, dinner, who the fuck cares? We're assembled. It's not going to take 6 or 7 days to get to the time tombs, isn't it? The Consul considered. Less than 2 days to get as far as the river could take them. 2 more days or less if the winds were right on the sea of grass. Certainly no more than 1 more day to cross the mountains. No, he said, not quite 6 days. All right, said Silenus. Then let's get on with the telling of tales. Besides, there's no guarantee that the Shrike won't come calling before the knock on his doors. If these bedtime stories are supposed to be helpful to our survival chances in some way, then I say let's hear from everyone before the contributors start getting chopped and diced by that ambulatory food processor we're so eager to visit. You're disgusting, said Lamia. Oh dear, oh darling, smiled Silenus. Those are the same words you whispered last night after your second orgasm. Lamia looked away. Father Hoyt cleared his throat and said, whose turn it is to tell a story? I mean, the silence stretched. Mine, said Feldman Cassad. The tall man reached into the pocket of his white tunic and helped up a slip of paper with a large 2 scribed on it. Do you mind doing this now? Asked Sol Weintraub. Cassad showed a hint of a smile. I wasn't in favor of doing it at all, he said. But if it were done where it's done, then it were done quickly. Then were the... Hey, cried Martin Silenus. The man knows his pre-Hegira playwrights. Shakespeare, said Father Hoyt. No, said Silenus. Lerner and fucking Louis. Neil Buggering Simon. Hamel fucking Postin. Colonel. Sol Weintraub, said Forman. The weather is nice. None of us seems to have anything pressing to do in the next hour or so. and we would be obligated if you would share the tale of what brings you to Hyperion on the Shrike's last pilgrimage. Cassette nodded. The day grew warmer, and the canvas awning snapped. The deck creaked, and the levitation barge Banneress worked its steady way upstream towards the mountains, the moors and the Shrike. The soldier's tale, the war lovers. Oh, I'm getting there. Yeah, I think I'm gonna finish that. It's not that bad. The soldier's tale, the war lovers. It was during the Battle of Agincourt that Feldman Cassad encountered the woman he would spend the rest of his life seeking. It was wet and chilly late October morning in AD 415. Cassad has been inserted as an archer into the army of Henry V of England. The English force had been French soil since August 14 and had been retraining from superior French forces since October the 8th. Henry had convinced his war council that the army could beat the French in a forced march to the safety of Calais. They had failed. Now, as October 25th downed grey, downed grey and dizzily, 7,000 Englishmen, mostly bowmen, faced a force of some 28,000 French men at arms across a kilometre of muddy field. Cassad was cold, tired, sick and scared. He and the other archers had been surviving on a little more than scavenging berries for the past week of the march, and almost every man on the line that morning was suffering from diarrhea. The air temperature was in the low 50s Fahrenheit, and Cassad had spent a long night trying to sleep on damp ground. He was impressed with the unbelievable realism of the experience. The Olympus Command School Historical Tactical Network was far beyond regular steam seams, as a full-form holos were beyond tin types. But the physical sensations were so convincing, so real, that Cassad did not relish the thought of being wounded. There were tales of cadets receiving fatal wounds in the OCC Haiti enzymes and being pulled dead from their emaciation crutches. Cassad and the other bowmen on Henry's right flank had been staring at the larger French force for most of the morning, when pennants waved the 15th century equivalent of sergeant's braid, and the archers obeyed the king's command and began marching towards the enemy. The regret English line, stretching about 700 meters across the field from tree line to tree line, considered of clusters of archers like Cassad's troop, interpressed with smaller groups of men at arms. The English had no formal cavalry, and most of the horses Cassad could see on his end of the field were carrying more men clustered near the king's command group 300 meters toward the center, or handled around the Duke of York's position much closer to where Cassad and the other archers stood near the right flank. This command's group reminded Cassad of a force, group mobile, staff headquarters, only instead of the inevitable forces of Com and Tigny, antennae, giving away their position, bring back... Alright, I think I'm gonna finish that today. What time do we have? Oh, it's a right time to end. I still have a bit time to mount shit on my camera and do some macro pictures. It's a nice sunny day, just great to sit outside and do some pictures. I will share them later. Cassad noticed that the French had plenty of horses. Alright, I would like to read it more, but he estimated 600 or 700 mounted men. Cassad did not like horses. He had seen holos and pictures, of course, but he had not encountered animals themselves until this exercise, and the size, smell and sound of them tended to be unnerving, especially so when the damn quadrupeds were armored chest and head, shod in steel and trained to carry armored men wielding 4 meters of lance. The English advance halted. Cassad estimated that his battle line was about 250 meters from the French. He knew from the experience of the past week that this was within longbow range, but he also knew that he would have to pull his arm half out of his socket to hold the pull. The French were shouting that Cassad assumed were insults. He ignored them as he and his silent comrades stepped forward, and they had planted their long arrows and 4 soft ground in which to drive their stakes. The stakes were long and heavy, and Cassad had been carrying his for a week. Almost a meter and a half long, the clumsy thing had been sharpened at both ends. Even the order first came down for archers to find sapling and cut stakes somewhere in the deep woods just after they had crossed the Somme. Cassad had wondered idly that the things were for. Now he knew. Every third archer carried a heavy mallet, and now they took turns driving the stakes in at a careful angle. Cassad pulled out his long knife, resharpened the edge, which, even leaning, rose almost to his chest, and stepped back through the hedgehog of sharpened stakes to await the French charge. The French did not charge. Cassad waited with others. His bow was strung. 48 arrows were planted into the clusters of his feet, and his feet were set properly. The French did not charge. The rain had stopped, but a cool breeze had come, and what little body heat Cassad had generated by the short march and the task of driving stakes had been lost quickly. The only sounds were the metallic shuffling of men and horses, occasional muttering of nervous laughs, and the heavier thud of hooves that French cavalry rearranged itself but still refused to charge. "Fuck this," said a greased yeoman a few feet from Cassad. "Those bastards were wasted out whole bleeding morning. They'd better piss or get off the pot." Cassad nodded. He was not sure if he was hearing and understanding Middle English or if the sentence had been in simple standard. He had no idea if the grizzled archer was another command school cadet, an instructor, or merely an artifact of the scene. He could not guess if the slang had been correct. He did not care. His heart was pounding and his palms were sweaty. He wiped his hands on his jerkin. As if King Henry had taken his cue from the old man's muttering, command flags suddenly bobbed and rose, signalled, screamed, and row upon row of English archers raised their longbows, pulled their when command were shouted, released on next command. 4 waves of arrows comprised of more than 6,000-meter long, chase-pointed cloth-yard missiles rose, seemed to hang in cloud 30 meters up, and fell on the French. There came the sound of horses screaming and 1,000 demented children pounding on the 1,000 tin pots of the French men at arms leaned into the rain of arrows to let their steel helmets and their chest and shoulders armor take the brunt of the downpour. Cassette knew that in military terms little real damage had been done, but this was small solace of the occasional French soldier with 10 inches of arrow through his eye, or to the scores of horses slipping, tumbling and crashing into one another, while their riders struggled to remove wooden shafts from the creature's back and flanks. The French did not charge. More commands were shouted. Cassette raised redoubled, loosed his arrow. Again and again. The sky darkened every 10 seconds. Cassette's arm and back itches from the punishing rhythm. He found that he felt neither elation nor anger. He was doing his job. His forearm was raw. Again the arrows flew, and again. 15 of his first sheaf of 24 arrows were gone when a cry went up along the English line and Cassette paused and glanced down while holding full pull. The French were charging. And I'm gonna stop here. I like